Okay, here we are. Another episode of Coffee with the Founder. Got my coffee cup. I'm Eddie Moore Jr., he, him, and his, founder of the White Privilege Conference, here today with another outstanding guest, Dr. Tanisha Brandon-Felder. Doc, we're glad you're here with us today. We've created these coffee talks as a way to introduce the people in our WPC family, our network, to each other better. So let's get started by just asking you, tell us who you are and what is it that you do?
So, hi, I'm Dr. Tanisha Brandon-Felder. Who am I? I am a mother, an educator, a wife, a daughter, a sister-in-law, lots of different things. I think, I like to also, in my kind of day-to-day life, also think of myself as a social justice warrior, a racial equity, I don't know, hopefully a powerhouse. It depends, I guess, the setting and the time. My position is a director of equity and family engagement. I work in a school district in Pacific Northwest, right outside of Seattle. So that's been a position I've had for 4 years. I was a classroom teacher for 16 years before that. So a lot of what I do is really examining the inequities that exist in our school system, in our really specific school district, and try to educate people, have conversations, and mostly work for change though. I try to transform our system.
Yeah. Now, Doc, I want to ask you about how you think things are going in reference to this work in education. I mean, after, 16 years in the classroom and now in this administrative position. But before that, how did you get here? Did you grow up thinking, hey, someday I'm going to be an administrator in the district running diversity programs? How did you get to this point?
Yeah. So as a classroom teacher, so I have to first say, I want to acknowledge that my background is Grambling State University. That's where I got my undergrad, historically Black college. And I think that's kind of where probably was kind of nurtured a little bit. It was my first experience being in an all Black school with, teachers that had, or professors that had doctor in front of their name that looked just like me. My student teaching experience was in a all Black school. And there was something that was really beautiful about learning about who you were and building up that cultural pride, but also having examples and models of yourself. So when I became a classroom teacher, I really strived to be that model for my other students. And I also wanted them to think about how they could be models for others, even if they were 6 years old. So I always try to teach from a social justice lens, and that was my perspective. That was the way in which I crafted my lessons. And that grew into having opportunities to actually start leading work with the adults in our building. That grew, and I went to a program at the University of Washington that specialized in equitable leadership at the doctoral level. And that kind of solidified my next steps. I wasn't sure what was going to happen after the classroom experience, but when there's opportunities for a director of equity position, it seemed like a really good fit. So I hopped from the classroom into the central office. I went from looking at just my classroom in our school into looking at a whole district. And it's been a journey, and I don't do it by myself. I have lots of people that I collaborate with as far as other districts and other leaders, but that was my journey, and I've enjoyed every moment of it. It's my passion. So it's easy in that way. It's an easy switch.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And now that you've been in the position, you spent some time grounding yourself in Afrocentric, historically Black colleges and universities, knowing who you are, knowing whose you are, where you come from, all that kind of stuff, into the classroom, building that, delivering that to kids, but also working with a diverse group of kids now in the administrative position.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, what's your sense of how we're doing when it comes to equity, diversity, and education? You could speak to that in the Pacific Northwest, but you've been in touch with and been connected to people across the nation as well. What's your sense of how we're doing around these issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been kind of really clarified. So in general, before even all COVID was happening, I think we knew the systems were never created for, students of color, specifically Black students. That was pretty much in everything you're seeing, whether it's the data around discipline or how academic, achievement is looking. And I think everyone kept wanting to figure out, why, like, why is that an issue? And like, what's happening with the kids, and asking that question and not really paying attention to what was happening with the adults in the system. And if adults have really deep belief systems around like who's capable and who's incapable, who has intellect, who doesn't have intellect, then automatically all those implicit biases are playing a role in how they teach our kids. So, and that also becomes then a model for other kids who are white watching kids of color, keep getting what might be perceived as being pushed farther and farther behind. So I think a lot of districts were starting to pay attention to that, which is where I think the idea of like having positions like director of equity, kind of popped up. But somehow, if you kind of look at this broad spectrum of who have those positions, it's still people of color who have those positions. And in some ways, I'm kind of proud of that, because we can own the piece around knowing that probably better than anyone else from what equity looks like and doesn't look like. But it also, in some ways, gives a lot of that burden to people of color then to take care of a problem that was not created by us. So for me, it's really important that white people are doing this work. And in my position in a mostly white environment, I'm not ever trying to be the one that, taking control of that all by myself. I feel like it's really important to spread that out so that everyone is owning that, because when and if things are going to change, everyone needs to believe in that change, not just me.
Now, what I know about you as well is not only what you mentioned, this collective, collaborative community approach, right? But even with that foundation, you still get resistance.
Yeah.
And so can you talk a little bit about what resistance looks like when you're doing the work that you do, which I appreciate, because not only is it collaborative, but it's not just like kumbaya. Some people accomplish collaboration because they stay at 101. They don't push folks. And that's not you. You push folks and still remain in that collaborative spirit. Mm-hmm. However, even with that foundation, you still get resistance. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like and how you take care of yourself?
Yeah.
Because it can wear and tear on you as well.
Mm-hmm. Resistance to me has been, I'm just going to be passive aggressive. Like, I haven't had too many of the conversations where someone's right in my face, just like flat out attacking everything I've done. I've had a couple of those. So the times where it looks like that is like where I'm in the middle of doing a bigger presentation in front of a group of people. And there's like one or two people in the audience who decide they want to take that moment to try to either challenge me around my knowledge base, like the content. Like, where did you get that? Your resources, your sources, like who else has said this? Are you really the definitive, expert? Like, all these things I haven't even necessarily said, but they're somehow kind of like piling that on as assumptions. And so then that tests like, just my ability to like, I guess, hold on to a room at the same time, because I'm also facilitating usually when that's happening. But also to reaffirm who I am. So I'm having to do all that work in the middle of like also trying to answer a question, which is not really even validating an answer. I don't need to answer someone challenging me on the essence of who I am. People don't challenge math. They don't challenge the facts that come behind science, usually, but they are going to challenge racial equity. So it sometimes comes around that. Sometimes it comes around like, how is that the definition? How do you know that's the definition? Like, where'd you get that from? And what if I disagree? Can I have my own definition? And sometimes it comes in the form of, asking for things that I know every other maybe department or director has, and having a little bit of, having to justify or ask questions about, why does that need to be? That's become less and less as the work I'm starting to do becomes much more, I would say, instilled and implemented in our district. People are seeing the results now, and people are, there's getting a lot of like, I say recognition around how our district is showing out now in a way that wasn't happening before. So it's not so much like, the direct confrontation is more passive, behind my back. And I feel like in that way, if you want to have a conversation, I'm not ever afraid of a conversation. We can talk about it, but I think it's not fair to then, create a whole like story behind the scenes and not ask a source. People I think do find me, intimidating, I guess, to ask a question to, or just don't feel like I'm worth, sometimes asking that question to. And even as a director who leads that work in a district. So I try to put myself in a place where we're going to have a conversation. Let's just have it. I heard you had a question. Let's answer that question, or at least try to. And then in the event that people are coming to something that I'm actually leading and trying to, like a workshop or a training, if people are not in a space to receive that, I don't really feel like I need to like entertain it. So then it's kind of nice to be able to say, you know, maybe it's not the right space for you right now. I'm going to ask you to come back, you know, when you're ready for this. There are a lot of people who are on board, and I want to make sure that we're giving, you know, time and attention for those people.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you about Black leadership,
Yeah.
Black woman leadership specifically, because sometimes all of those variables matter.
Yeah.
But before that, let me ask you about COVID-19 and how this work of diversity and inclusion has changed because of the time we're in. What are you seeing? What are the challenges you're seeing in your position, but also as a district as it relates to COVID-19?
I think the things I'm seeing right now is how many barriers we put in place for our families and our students of color. I mean, I know we've talked about that in really general, abstract terms, like, you know, we have these barriers, we have, you know, obstacles, like there are things that, you know, I don't know, prohibit or hold back, you know, some of the opportunities for, you know, families of color. But I think when you're right in front of it and you all of a sudden the things that you have put into place can't be justified anymore, they don't meet the needs anymore. Maybe it's really clear they never met the needs, but now it's really like there's nothing to hide from. I think that's what I'm finding in our district specifically, is that there's nowhere to hide. There's no busyness, there's no buildings, there's no like, you know, people in front of a room, there's no like whatever the school was offering. None of that stuff exists right now. So you only have the very raw experience of what families are going through right now and what students are experiencing right now. And a lot of those things are things that were put into place way before COVID even happened. So things like, you know, how the grading system is working. What exactly are we grading right now? Why are we trying to hold on to the same grading system that we had before this? It wasn't fair then, it's not fair now. We're readjusting how grading looks, right? What does engagement look like? And who gets to decide what engagement looks like? And if you're thinking about families who really are right now being traumatized, all of us are having, you know, hardships, but if we're having families that are truly traumatized, maybe getting a kid in front of a laptop to do a Zoom session and say 5 minutes, hey teacher, I'm here, but I just can't be, you know, I can't do the work right now, but I'm present. Can that count for engagement? Like, who gets to decide what the judgment is or the quality of that is? So questions like that are coming up. We're definitely seeing, like, you know, the needs of just like, you know, family, you know, supports, like, you know, of course, shelter, rent assistance, utilities, all those things that have been happening. And schools can't take care of all of that, but it's funny how like they really they expect, you know, families or kids to tune in so closely and be so present, when the same families right now who maybe are choosing to be quiet were always quiet. They were never feeling engaged. They were never feeling connected to the schools. And that's a question we have to ask why.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know about you. I don't think we see any end in sight.
Yeah. I don't think I'm not very optimistic about it's going to be all better soon.
Yeah.
I'm really not interested in going back to normal. I think we have got to learn some lessons from what's happening right now, and we have to do better.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you about Black leadership. I mean, sometimes I don't even know what the question is, but you know, I'm just wondering, like, is it different in leadership position when you're Black? And specifically in your case, being a Black woman, can you just talk about what you see, what you sense, what you experience, just being you in a position of leadership?
Yeah. I just had this conversation a little bit yesterday. We have a Black affinity group in our district, and it was perfect timing for us to get together because I think we're needing each other. I am the only Black director in our district. There's another Black male in our district, and there's only 42 Black people in a district of over 42 staff, over a staff of over 1,000, just to kind of give some context. So I get to be in positions with my role that put me very close to to the superintendent, to all the decision making. Like, that's just kind of how this position has evolved, and I pushed for that really intentionally. It wasn't like that when it first was developed. And that has challenges because, like I said, kind of implied before, like there are things where other directors who have been around before who are all white have asked for things. And there's not really a lot of conversation that happens. Not a lot of, tell me more about what that means. pretty much, those are kind of taken at face value. There's been a lot of like, me having to negotiate, having to write stuff up, having to submit things, having to ask more questions, having to follow up with things just to build the department when I first started. And it's my 4th year. So everything that I have built was not given to me. Like I literally created that from like the ground up. There was nothing in place. I didn't even have a budget. And so like when people come to me, first is their assumption that I just know about race because I'm Black. So the Black thing like really well, because of course that's your experience. They don't take into consideration the education that comes with that. And it's one of the reasons why I don't use doctor in front of my title, in front of my name very often. Like I use it really selectively. But if I'm presenting in front of a bigger group in my district, I always use doctor. And that's more as a way for me to say, wait a second, whatever you think it is that you know about me, let me just introduce this piece of it. Because I feel like sometimes that gets dismissed really easily. I think the other thing is just like, the piece like around like, how I talk when I talk and how that's received. So if I am going to have a conversation, even about a really heightened topic, the modulation of my voice has to be very specific, like right about here. And I always say, never really go right about here, because as soon as it raises a little bit, all of a sudden it's threatening, it's scary. Probably my worst experience was when I actually was called out as a director for leaving paper on a copy machine, which was something that is in the general sense has never happened to any other director in our building. I was making copies. I was in a rush. I forgot that happens sometimes. And the copies I was making were all about, actually, I think it was about a racial equity topic, because I was going into a workshop. And one of the people in our office, like an administrative assistant, put a sticky note saying, please make sure you take your papers off the copy machine when you're finished. Didn't have my name on it, but I'm the only person in that office that does racial equity work. So I'm just going to put 2 and 2 together and think it's me. So I said, I'd really appreciate if you could just talk to me and let me know. This is something that we always do. We put sticky notes on things, instead of like talking to a person. Well, that really resulted then in like half of the office, I'm feeling very fragile around that situation. And that woman who was white then came to me. I had to go to her. She didn't come to me. And she ended up breaking down crying. And I was like, do you do that with other directors? Do other directors come talk to you and you have, a crying fit in the middle of it? I don't want to have to carry that burden for you. And I feel like that's kind of what happens sometimes, is I end up having to carry the burden for their fragility instead of letting me lead my work. But that takes too much time. I don't have time to take care of you and also take care of myself and do my work. Because part of being a Black female leader also is like, I'm putting on a whole armor when I'm going to work every day. And I'm waiting for people just to kind of get out the way and let me do what I'm doing without having to question things. So I think the Black female leader specifically is like a lot of maneuvering. It's like, you can't be too knowledgeable, but you have to be smart. You can't be too, passionate, but you have to be like, or you can't be angry. Like there's all these kind of like balances. And so at some point you got to figure out how to be your authentic self and be okay with that. And I think I've kind of reached the point where either you kind of take me as I am, which means especially in my own homes, I'm working remotely. I don't have time to code switch with you. Like I'm in my house and I can't feel any more comfortable than being in my own space. And I caught myself early in this whole thing when we start working from home, like starting to code switch. And I was like, that's the first thing to go. Like, no more of that. Like I'm in my own house, in my space. I'm inviting you into me. Like, welcome. And I don't know. So that's a lot of what I've kind of noticed. It's ongoing. You're right. It's a big question, Eddie. It's a big question.
Yeah,
so it's a little snippet of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be in touch with you around more of that, because I think as we look ahead, and we're, over these next 25 years thinking about replacing ourselves with future leaders, we got to start having this conversation, because what we're experiencing may have some similarities to what our parents and grandparents and elders before us experienced, but there are some unique kinds of things and some now new language like white fragility that we can use to kind of explain some of this stuff. But I'm wondering if a young future leader, Black leader specifically, or leader of color, more broadly, comes to you and asks for advice, in reference to working in predominantly white space or historically white space like you're in.
Yeah.
What's your advice to future leaders coming into positions like this where you may have had a grounding in historically Black colleges and universities? Many may not have, but now you're in a historically white place designed by white people for white people. What would be your advice to them?
Yeah, my advice is to understand whiteness. Like, I think it's super important to understand how whiteness works, and not just from like the observatory kind of experience. I mean, I think really studying that. And so I really did study, like I read Debbie Irving's Waking Up White. I did read all of 3 Robin DiAngelo books. I did watch Tim Wise videos. I went to the white privilege conference. Like, there are things that I feel like I needed to know if I was going to be in front of spaces that were mostly not looking like me. Because when things like white fragility show up, if you don't know what that looks like, you can start doubting yourself as a person of color. Something is wrong with you. And it's easy to shake that foundation, but that's intentional. It's intentional for you to doubt yourself and to then continue raising white supremacy. So if people are coming and looking as, being leaders of color, I first want to say, first understand who you are. Like, be really clear with your racial identity, with your own, racial story, and be okay with that. Because if you're not okay with who you are, you're not going to be able to last. Like, you're either going to conform to the system or you're going to be pushed out of the system. The second thing is, you really understand the whiteness context, the history of how white supremacy works in our country. And not just the things we see on TV with all the, torches and stuff, the real understanding of how the institute of white supremacy has been crafted and how it's been designed to keep us down and to keep us away from things like positions like I'm in. And then I think it's really important to have affinity. It's important to be around other people who look like you, who have similar histories of you, who understand when you're talking, so you don't have to explain everything. You can just kind of be. Having those refuge points are really important. So mentoring is really important, having a mentor of color who gets it, understanding and studying whiteness, and then being really clear about who you are.
Now, you have been busy during quarantine.
Yes, I have.
Meeting-wise, you've been really trying to, what I feel like, take some advantage or do something positive with this time. Can you just talk a little bit about what you've been doing and what are you thinking about? What has this time in quarantine taught you about you?
Yeah. So I have to say, we were planning on hosting the White Privilege Symposium. And there was a lot of momentum around that, making that happen. And that was the things we were if something has to go, let that be the last thing we have to go. Because we really wanted to do it. I have to say, I'm still feeling so bad about that. But there'll be another day and we'll figure that out. But a lot of my energy was getting a lot of our groups and everything ready for that. And that meant our leadership too. So the momentum around, prepping people to be in a space where they really were talking about white privilege and also talking about themselves in that process, that was a lot of the work we were doing. And the very first thing that happened after schools closed was, do we continue with our equity lead group, which is a group of equity leaders that are really specifically intentionally trained, meet monthly, lead professional development in their buildings. Do we continue with that, or do we kind of let it rest for a second? And that felt like a group that we needed to continue going, because people were going to start dropping equity really quick if we didn't have a focus. And the focus was clear, obviously we are in an inequitable situation. We're about to see what's going to happen. We had nothing in place yet for online learning, family support, none of that. So we started doing our weekly meetings. And so I'm meeting right now with our deans who are really responsible for, primarily it was discipline. We're shifting that to really more student social emotional support now. Our family advocates who are really working with the day-to-day needs of families. And then our equity leads who are continuing to do professional development with their staff. So we have professional development happening around race and equity, I would say at least 2 or 3 times a week right now. And I'm monitoring all that and doing my own professional development. I'm reading a lot of books, continuing growing my own mind, because when you're not in front of a group all the time, having to be in it, you can get a little rusty. So it's important to keep my mind sharp, to be going to webinars and watching movies and other things, listening to things, so I can keep educating. But mostly what I'm doing is really trying to be in the conversations that are happening around what does happen with grading right now. What does happen with attendance? What does happen with engagement? How are we measuring, where students and families are? Who's keeping us in check? So like I'm in sessions, I feel like I'm on Zoom a lot. But what I wasn't going to do was like, I worked too hard to get our district to a point where we were like just are talking and breathing equity. And I didn't want to see that disappear.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening right now.
Yeah. Can you talk about mama duty? Like, I mean, that's got to be something that I think we all found ourselves surprised by, that we essentially all were forced into homeschooling.
Yep.
So what I'm wondering is, particularly as a Black mom, like what are some of the challenges and opportunities you're facing being thrust into this, essentially your own job, and now the job of homeschooling?
Yep. Well, my daughter went to a school that did not have anything set up for the first couple of weeks around what's going to happen with kids. Like, do we have anything for them to do? So the very first thing I did, mostly to support her, but I went ahead and expanded it for the whole school, is I created a Google Classroom for every grade level. And I just uploaded with like, just different activities that I found. I did a bunch of searches online. I put links in and videos. And so if kids didn't have anywhere else to go for like online learning or any kind of access at home, just something they could plug into. And that's what we started doing. My husband and I are both educators, so we have that as a privilege, but the piece people don't understand is that we're not teaching our own kid. Like that's not really the same thing. So she's a 7th grader in the middle of middle school. What became really important for me, especially as a Black mother teaching and I'm living with a Black almost teenager, is I wanted her to feel okay. Like I wanted her to feel safe. I wanted her to feel healthy. I wanted her to feel certain that she was going to be okay through all of this. And she was really worried about falling behind, just like, with her friends. I wasn't so concerned with her falling behind things like, language arts and social studies. Those are things I think you just kind of, you can learn that, you can bring that in. Things like math and science, where I know that, traditionally, historically, we have not been able to continue moving forward. We get locked out of those AP or honor classes as we move forward. I wanted to continue growing in her in those areas. So advocating with her teachers around, having one-on-one time, being, trying to stay in contact with her teachers around, what time is this going to be happening? And as they're growing their own system now, it's easier for me to kind of plug, my daughter into that. But I would say getting the right books in front of her so she has positive messages, getting the right stories in front of her, she has positive stories to watch. I just wanted her to be and feel okay. But it's hard to, like I said, so I'm spending a lot of my time working. And so how do I also, make time to be a mom at home? So I'm blessed to have my husband here and we're balancing that out somewhat. But there are days where she's by herself and we're both in meetings. And there's times where it's just like, it's just hard. I block off an hour and a half every day in the middle of the day to do math with her. And also we have a hot lunch. I'm the lunch lady. So I make her a hot lunch every day. And that's kind of how I kind of get through the day. I still feel guilty, but I don't feel like I'm being negligent. And then we have lots of cuddle time, karaoke, dance parties in the afternoon and the evening.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that, because I think it's important people to know it's okay to be a little nervous and scared and embarrassed. And
yeah, I don't think you guys are doing it perfectly. We're just trying the best we can.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, to parents of color, because, as you know, there are a few current events going on in our society right now, particularly as it relates to Black folks, but I think people of color in general, when you look at Latinx folks, some immigration issues. I don't think we're having enough voice around what's happening to those families that we somewhat saw being separated and placed in these inhuman situations. What's going on there? Our API community, being in the Pacific Northwest, you have a large API community there. So there's just some stuff going on in the news. And I'm wondering, what's your message to parents of color, before I ask you your message for white parents? What's your message to parents of color as you, again, try to do your job, do the job of supporting homeschooling, whatever that looks like, and then also some of these current events happening around us that we got to process as adults, and then our kids may be seeing, absorbing some of that?
Yeah. I know the news is hard to watch right now. But there's always something negative that's happening, and sad, because that's someone's life that's being lost, or threatened. And I can say, my advice for families is to balance it out. As hard as it is to, not that you want to turn a blind eye, it's not what I'm saying. I just feel like there's a balance to how much we can take in right now. All of us are being really impacted by COVID-19, no matter what that connection is, whether we're in our homes, whether we have a loved one that's been suffering, whether we've been suffering or been sick. And it's hard for our bodies to take all that in at the same time. So like we hear like, what's happening with, different, youth or people who have been, hurt, killed, or detained. And that's one piece of our brain holding on to that, right? But maybe we're not going to be able to address that yet, because right now we're also trying to figure out how we're going to maintain during like this, this stay at home or quarantine. So our brain's also trying to figure out how to, process that. And we're trying to figure out how to work. If we have jobs, how do we process that? And then we have kids, maybe, like, how do we process that? Our body's good at taking care of one trauma at a time, and everything else will get blocked out. But when it all hits, like when that adrenaline is finished and you're not running on fumes anymore, your body's going to remember. It's going to start coming back and reminding you of all the different things you've been compartmentalizing. And that's where that PTSD is going to show up. So my advice for families, for parents working with their kids, is be careful about how much you expose right now. I think there's lessons in how we can be, doing really good things, be really good, people, be kind to other people, do like, what kind of, things can we give towards? How can we use our money or our access, our privilege in ways to help others right now? Are there funds that we can donate to? But I think it's really important to also realize that if we're just opening everything up, and that creates a little bit of, insecurity again. Am I safe? Am I going to be okay? And all we can say for right now is like, yeah, you are safe. And right now you are okay. And we're going to take care of what we have right in front of us. Because it's hard. And you're right, as adults, we're also trying to figure it out too. Like, I can't run down the street anymore. What do you mean I can't jog? Like, there's just so many things that now we got to balance that out. What about the mask situation? So as we're trying to stay healthy, we're also trying to stay alive. Yeah. And that's a lot.
Yeah. I feel like pre-COVID pandemic, we were doing lots of work around, as you mentioned, affinity groups and allies, particularly white allies. Mm-hmm. And I feel like now with COVID, post-COVID, if we've learned one thing, as you mentioned, the gaps are wide and widening. Mm-hmm. I mean, I just have to say, it feels like it's good to be white again.
Yep.
And I'm not blaming anybody for that. I'm just saying, this is what I'm seeing. And I'm wondering, what's your message to white allies mm-hmm. about what we're seeing right now, but most importantly about what we're going to need in the over the next 25 years in reference to being an ally around these issues?
I would say now is not the time for the bystander effect, or for just to be reading a book and saying, yep, I got that because I read that book. This is not the time for that. I think if people have been reading books, if people have been attending seminars, people have been doing, podcasts, now's the time to move into your acting. So what do you do with that? So obviously it's really unfortunate that the white privilege conference wasn't able to happen, because if you think about the timing, it would have been a perfect motivator for any white person who's like, okay, what do I do with this energy? Feed it right into something like this. How do you start standing up in the face of, of injustice? How do you speak out? How do you speak with? How do you, walk alongside? I think, let's not sit back and think about how as white people, you're not being affected or impacted. Think about how you can get up in there and get dirty, because people are getting dirty. People are getting messy, and we need you. And not just the voice on the side where it's quiet. We need you to be loud and bold and be out there. And if you're seeing nonsense, call it out, because it's easier for you to call that out than for me to call that out. It's safer, I should say, for you as a white person to call that out than for me as a Black person to call that out. That's right now, I feel like we kind of are at in our country in a lot of different areas, is that if our white, allies and accomplices are not going to be the ones speaking up, you're basically putting all of our lives at jeopardy. Mm. And I think that's not okay. That's not fair. So it's enough of looking good and sounding good. I need you to be good. I need you to actually show good. Go out there and do something.
Yeah. I sometimes wonder what it's like in the Pacific Northwest. Where often the perception is all inclusive, mm-hmm. progressive. I mean, there are more resources in some people's individual homes out in that area than some cities will ever see in their whole existence.
Yeah.
What's been your experience really doing the work of social justice in a place where my good friend Ed Taylor likes to say, the illusion of inclusion?
Yeah.
I mean, is it more difficult to be in a place assumed to be more progressive? I'm sorry, Ed Reed. I'm sorry. Ed Reed is the brother's name who said that. Ed Taylor was University of Washington. I can't get the Eds mixed up. Ed Reed at Seattle U, he said that illusion of inclusion. I want to ask you, you've been in the South, spent some time in the South, know the South, where racism is like cognac. You know, it's strong in your face.
That's fair. Yep.
Now you're in progressive Northwest. How are they different? What's tougher? Just wanted to hear your perspective about working, doing the work, understanding the work in those two different areas.
There's some advantage in knowing what you're stepping into. I did a cold conference in North Carolina a couple of years ago and wasn't really sure what I was like stepping into. Black person leading it. Ended up being a pretty multiracial space, but you just know, like people just show you, they just tell you, it's just pretty obvious, right? There's no tiptoeing around it, which is so relieving actually. It's nice to know that. You know, it's nice to know that like here's where people stand, even if I don't necessarily agree with it, even if it feel good. Here, you're always guessing. And this is the part where you really feel like, is it me? Like I would describe it almost like, gaslighting most of the time, like it's just not clear at any given moment. And here's the tricky part is that you can be in a room with people, all be like, working together, all seem to be agreeing on something. People are saying the right words and it sounds really good, but then you push on something that, actually touches them personally. Something you're asking them to either, consider, you're challenging, maybe offering, and all of a sudden that white fragility really does pop up. Like the kind of like, wait a second, like not too close, or like it looks good over there, but like not too close. I like to say equity sounds good to everybody until you actually ask people to be equity and to do equity. And that's how it feels. Like, it feels like, I feel like I need to kind of watch a person for a long time, a white person for a long time, before I really feel like they are a white accomplice with me. I feel like I have lots of people who are white who consider themselves my ally, but I have a few handful of people, like maybe 2 or 3 people in my hand, who I know for sure that if I'm going to go down, they're coming right down there with me, and they're going to be happy to come with me. Yeah. And if they've been showing that like over and over again, I don't have to doubt that. And I think that's not true for a lot of people in the Northwest. We say a lot of really good things, but our actions are really different. And right now we have some stuff in the news that actually shows that, there's a lot of Asian stigmas happening right now, and people are getting super bold with that. So I never assume that I'm in a space that everyone gets it, that everyone, understands it. I think it's even more dangerous, like Robin DiAngelo says, even more dangerous here because people think they got it. Yeah. So if you try to challenge them on it, now you're just causing a problem.
Yeah, I like your distinction between ally and accomplice.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to give a shout out to your superintendent. Remind me of her name.
Rebecca Minor. Yeah,
Dr. Minor, because as you mentioned, in my experience, 20 plus years organizing white privilege, that one way we know folks are willing to go down the alley as opposed to hang out around by the alley is when it comes to supporting the White Privilege Conference, the White Privilege Symposium. And I got to give Sister Minor credit that she was willing to go down the alley with us.
Yeah, she was.
Let me ask this about your future. I mean, what's on the horizon? What do you got planned? I mean, superintendent in your future? I mean, give us a sense of what's on the horizon for you over the next 10 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, I went through a program that did have superintendency as one of the strands, so I'm not too far from going that route if I choose to. I don't know, I feel I'm not a very political person. I like to have some autonomy and like how to make choices, and I know that position is a pretty political position. So this depends on being the right fit if that's where I chose to go. I like to write. I haven't written for a long time. It was actually nice. I got a chance to write a letter to my Black daughter. Thank you for that opportunity. And it felt really good to kind of, bring those juices back up again. So I really have been thinking about, I'm writing a book actually about what it means to be a Black female leader in a mostly white place. And Zaretta Hammond's been a really great mentor for me right now. So she's kind of like, asking questions and being a sounding board, which is really nice. I feel very honored to have that. But I want to be around other Black, writers and other Black artists and other Black educators who also are thinking creatively around, like, how do we get our stories out there? And not just a story for the sake of telling our story, but our story for helping the legacy behind us. So I'm hoping in 10 years, I have like some really concrete things I can hand over to someone and say, here's something that you can take that I wrote, or I created, and that you can use in your journey, in your opportunities.
Yeah. Well, you tell Sister Hammond I said, what's up? And I'd love to get her on coffee talks when her schedule permits, because she's busy. I understand. Listen, if there's anything we can do, WPC, myself, the Privilege Institute, to partner with you and any future projects, let us know. In fact, I'm going to be in touch with you because I got a few more writing opportunities on the horizon, and I'd love to partner with you in reference to that. I want to end in a fun way by asking you to make some tough selections, to give me your thought around some subject matters that are that is about 15 to 30 seconds long, or you got to pick one of the two. For example, would you go with Ta-Nehisi Coates or Alex Haley?
Oh, that's a good one. I'm gonna go with Ta-Nehisi Coates. I love him. I love his writing. I love both, but that's who I'm gonna go with. Yep.
Are you gonna go with Macklemore or Sir Mix-a-Lot?
Just because I have to always go with something that's Black, I'm gonna go with Sir Mix-a-Lot.
Your thoughts on this topic, white teachers?
Oh, you said give my thoughts on that topic?
Yes.
White teachers, take care of our Black babies, please. That's my thought.
Yeah. Cardi B or Nicki Minaj?
Oh, I just finished watching Rhythm and Flow. I really liked watching Cardi B on that. So Cardi B.
Are you going with The Wire or New Jack City?
Ooh, The Wire, like epic. Yes, they're both good, but I gotta have a whole, I need 6 seasons to carry me through.
You going with Will Smith or Denzel?
Denzel, always.
Whitney or Tina?
I grew up with Whitney, so I'll go with Whitney.
Beyonce or Janet?
Oh, these are so hard. Janet. I love Janet Jackson. Yep.
NWA or Public Enemy?
I'm from the West Coast, so NWA. California.
Justin Bieber or Justin Timberlake?
Justin Timberlake all day long.
Taylor Swift or Lady Gaga?
Lady Gaga.
Michael Eric Dyson, Cornel West?
Ooh, Michael Eric Dyson is spicy. I'll go with him.
Viola Davis or Kerry Washington?
When Viola Davis cries, everything stops. So that one tear, that nose, yep.
Now, listen, you're in a lip sync championship.
Yes.
And you got to pick one song to sing to win the championship. What's going to be your song?
Not even a contest. Candy Girl. Love Candy Girl, New Edition, my favorite group. Yep. Yes.
My goodness, I like that. Listen, we've been asking people, what have you been watching, reading, listening to during the quarantine? Is there anything you had mentioned you've been keeping busy in reference to that? Anything you want to share that we can add to our list of things people have been watching, listening to? This can be stuff you can learn from or things that maybe taking you away.
Okay, so one movie I was really surprised but really liked was Uncorked on Netflix. Netflix, it's a really beautiful story about a guy. Look it up. It's a really good movie. I was really surprised, but I loved it. So Uncorked is that one. And the books that I have been reading, so I read all of Jason Reynolds' books, every last one. Stamped, I just finished that. I'm also reading How to Be an Anti-Racist, Ibram X. Kendi. Right now I'm actually reading the Ballad of, is it Songbirds and Snakes? Might have the title mixed up. That's the prequel for Hunger Games. So I'm reading that. I read Solo by Kwame Alexander. I also read The Crossover by Kwame Alexander. I'm also reading the new Terry McMillan. I forgot the name of that title. What have I been reading for, I mean, of course, like, so Miles Morales, also by Jason Reynolds, but it's like the Spider Universe, the Spider-Verse is really amazing. All about white supremacy. You wouldn't even know. It's a great story. So, I mean, those are some of the books I've been reading. Yeah. Oh, and I have to say the last one I just finished reading that I really, really liked was The Sun is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon.
Yeah, well, that really helps us to strengthen our book selection. So thank you for that very much. Doc, I always appreciate spending time with you. I live in Wisconsin, so it's just good to see Black people, you know, and I appreciate you coming on, dropping some knowledge, sharing your story, your work. And again, we'll look forward to staying in partnership, staying in collaboration, and hopefully 2021, we could bring WPC, the White Privilege Symposium, back to the Shoreline area because of your leadership. And in the meantime, though, be safe out there. Take care of yourself. I'm sending you a Wakanda hug, but thank you again. I appreciate it.
You are welcome. Thanks so much for asking me. I really appreciate it too.
I love the shirt. We got our new line in, so I appreciate you rocking a little WPC.
Oh, yeah.
Peace.
Bye. Thank you.